To begin our morning's reflection on our relationship to what sustains us, by which I mean our Mother Earth, we have a reading from Alice Waters, and I will find it. Everything is human. Some years ago, a friend and I walked out into the countryside to listen to what Mother Earth was saying and to better hear our own thoughts. We had prepared ourselves to experience what in the old days would have been called a vision, and what today probably has no name that is not found somewhere amusing by many. Because there is no longer countryside that is not owned by someone, we stopped at the entrance to a large park, many miles from the city. By the time we had walked 100 yards, I felt I could go no farther and lay down where I was, across the path in a grove of trees. For several hours, I lay there, and other people entering the park had to walk around me. But I was hardly aware of them. I was in tense dialogue with the trees. As I was lying there, really across their feet, I felt or heard with my feelings the distant request from them that I remove myself. But these are not feet, I thought, peering at them closely, but roots. Roots do not tell you to go away. Looking at their feet or roots, which stuck up all over the ground and directly beneath my cheek, I saw that the ground from which they emerged was gray, looking as if it had been poisoned. Aha, I thought. This is obviously a place where chemicals were dumped. The soil has been poisoned, the trees afflicted, and they don't like it. I hastily communicated this deduction to the trees and asked that they understand it was not I who had done this. I had just moved to this part of the country, I said. But they were not appeased. Get up. Go away, they replied. But I refused to move, nor could I. I needed to make them aware of my innocence. I love trees, I said. Human, please, they replied. But I do not cut you down in the prime of life. I do not haul your mutilated and stripped bodies shamelessly down the highway. It is the lumber companies, I said. Just go away, said the trees. All my life, you have meant a lot to me. I love your grace, your dignity, your serenity, your generosity. Well, said the trees, before I finished my list, we find you without grace, without dignity, without sincerity, and there is no generosity in you either. Just ask any tree. You butchered us, you burn us, you grow us only to destroy us. That we are alive and feelings means nothing to you. But I, as an individual, am innocent, I said, though it did not occur to me that I live in a wood house. I eat on a wood table. I sleep on a wood bed. Finally, after much discourse, I understood what the trees were telling me. Being an individual doesn't matter. Just as human beings perceive all the trees as one, all human beings to the tree are one. The earth holds us responsible for our crimes against it, not as individuals, but as species. This was the message of the trees. I found it a terrifying thought. For I had assumed that the earth, the spirit of the earth, noticed exceptions, those who wantonly damage it and those who do not. But the earth is wise. It has given itself into the keeping of all, and all, therefore, are accountable.
When I was in seminary in Berkeley 35 years ago, for a class in work and vocation, I interviewed a second cousin of mine. This is not in the manuscript. It comes from listening to someone else read the reading that I had read so many times over the years. But I interviewed a second cousin of mine by the name of Bryce Seidel, who was CEO of a group in San Francisco called Simpson Lumber. And I was never brave enough to ask him about accountability. But on one hand, the words that Mileva just shared with us, but the earth is wise, it has given itself into the keeping of all, and all are therefore accountable. Hold those in your mind. Humbling words, though, those, and ones that, at least to me, ring true. On the other hand, perhaps, is the joy I observed yesterday when I was out walking the dog. Watson and I walked by a small playground in a park not too far from our home. Parents were out watching their kids go down the slide in the shade of live oaks and bay laurels. I'd have to be in a really bad way to take in that scene without smiling. And if that wasn't enough on its own, the scene brought to mind a poem from, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Rabindranath Tagore, an Indian poet and philosopher, who once wrote, "The same stream of life that runs through my veins night and day runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measures." Yes, it is the same life that shoots in joy through the numberless gray blades of grass and breaks into tumultuous waves of leaves and flowers. It is the same life that is rocked in the ocean cradle of birth and death, in ebb and flow. I feel my limbs are made glorious by the touch of this world of life, and my pride is from the life throb of the ages dancing in my blood. I consider these words true as well, if a bit amplified, at least from my own day-to-day experience. What am I, though? What are we to do with this paradox? Because the two notions, first, that we as a species have abused our relationship with the natural world on which we fundamentally depend, and second, that we are part of the natural order and as such have the same energy running through our veins as flowers do in springtime, well, there's friction between those two understandings, isn't there? Let me back up a bit before we continue. For 56 years now, we've been celebrating April 22nd as Earth Day. At a UNESCO conference in San Francisco in 1969, an activist named John McConnell proposed setting aside a day in honor of the Earth and world peace. Earlier that year, in late January, an oil well exploded 6 miles off the coast of Santa Barbara. Gaylord Nelson, a U.S. Senator from Wisconsin, flew over the resulting oil spill and a month after McConnell's proposition, talked up a national teach-in when we had such things on environmentalism to take place on April 22nd. In time, Nelson's and McConnell's ideas merged, and the first Earth Day was celebrated April 22nd, 1970. President Richard Nixon even planted a tree in commemoration on the grounds of the White House. And now we raise the Rose Garden. Progress! I find it interesting that McConnell used a photograph that the astronauts on Apollo 17 took of the Earth and he put it against a flat blue background as the unofficial Earth Day flag. And recently we've seen familiar, though much more highly resolved photos of our planet from the crew of Artemis II. Seeing Mother Earth in all her extraordinary, resilient, fragile beauty is always welcome and always instructive. I have to say, returning to California after 4 years in the Great White North, meaning Canada, last winter felt like cheating. Still, I've never lived in a place with a stronger environmental ethic as Canada. In a climate strike protest in September 2019, more than 1 million Canadians took to the streets across the country, more than half of them in one city, Montreal. That did represent 1 out of every 8 people in the Montreal metro area. One of the leaders in the congregation I served worked in the climate crisis office in Ottawa's City Hall. The city had a climate crisis office. And at one point during my 4 years at First Unitarian Ottawa, leaders in the congregation's environmental action group sold toilet paper made sustainably from bamboo during coffee hour. Is bamboo toilet paper a thing here? All right, I hadn't heard of it before. I considered it an interesting experiment that didn't turn out as badly as I feared. So I have still some learning to do, obviously. But still, with that congregation's ethic in place, I once or twice heard derogatory comments made about a church leader who declined our religious educator's request to tell a story one Sunday morning about a family who took a plane trip for their vacation. He declined to do that. He told a Winnie the Pooh story instead. A religious educator was not amused. Even though that person, that leader named David, he and his French wife flew to France with their children every summer. Hypocrisy, I'm not going to throw stones. That congregational ethic prompted me to look into the carbon load I was responsible for when Ann and I flew to Australia in February of 24. Ann's son CJ's best friend and his wife had moved to Melbourne several years before, and they had just had their first child. As the child's mother was estranged from her own family, we went to say hello, greet them, and play temporary surrogate grandparents. It was kind of fun. And I was feeling great about the visit until back home I realized maybe I should look up the carbon footprint of those flights. Given the distance, the type of plane, and an estimate as to how many passengers were on board, my best guess is I contributed 7.3 tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere each direction. That's roughly 14.6 tons round trip. When I try to imagine 14.6 tons of gas and how much space that would take up, My brain snaps. Now, the Subaru I drive is not a light vehicle. It weighs a little under 2 tons. Does that mean my share of the CO2 emissions had as much mass as over 7 of my cars? I generally think of myself as a good person, but I've come to realize that I need to nuance that sense with some serious reality testing. A few months after we returned from down under, a member of the congregation I served in Ottawa, one who I had only met once because he didn't come to church on Sundays, sent me a letter. Now, if you think Canadians are earnest people, unfortunately, this may reinforce that notion. Here's what he wrote. Reverend, I have a question. What should I do to respond to what is called global warming? He continues, I don't pretend to understand the impossible complexity of the question, but I cannot avoid addressing it. I drive a car. I like to travel. I heat my house with natural gas. I eat meat. My wife and I live comfortably. Thank you very much. He continued, today the Keeling reading is 427.48 parts per million. 5 years ago, it was 410 parts per million. China emits 12.7 billion tons of carbon dioxide each year. The United States, 4.9, and Canada, somewhere around 500,000 tons of carbon dioxide annually. He wrapped up his letter to me, Reverend, if you tell me to go jump in the Ottawa River, I will certainly understand. I would like to say that the author's last line had absolutely no bearing on my willingness to reply, but I have to admit it may have. Humor eases everything. I wrote back to our earnest questioner with only the slightest measure of an answer and a question of my own. Might I use his note to me in an upcoming Sunday sermon? His reply, please feel free to ignore, criticize, or use my thoughts. However, I read about Jim Hansen, Al Gore, Bill McKibben, and others, and hurt with them as they are ignored and the apathy they are up against. I use the word apathy perhaps a little too casually. Whatever it is has given us unimaginable desecration of the biosphere. My question remains, how do I respond? And then a word that may either be think or thank you, followed by an exclamation point before he signs off once again. Reading it over and trying to decipher that last word, I realized I had to take the word as both thank and think. Now, for those not familiar with the Keating reading in his first letter, the Keeling curve is a daily record of global atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, monitored by the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego. Today, meaning yesterday, that reading is at 429.70 parts per million, up over 1.5 points in the 16 months since that congregant first wrote me. His question remains and has been what I like to call a friendly ghost haunting me ever since. How do I respond, or more generally, how are we called to live given what we trust to be true? Now let's return to the beginning of this talk. On one hand, responsibility, on the other hand, celebration. I'm reminded of a short passage from E.B. White that has seared itself into the inside of my skull. I may have offered this previously. White was, if you may remember, the author of both Stuart Little and Charlotte's Web, those classic children's stories. He was also a long-standing editor at the New Yorker magazine, In short, he was a fine writer with a very wide range. Here's what he once said that is written right here. I rise in the morning torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. This makes it hard to plan the day. Now, I don't know about you, but that explains more of my internal dialogue each day than I'd care to admit. I began this talk with the reading Mileva offered us on one hand, a call to recognizing we are all accountable to the planet on which we so clearly and thoroughly depend, and on the other hand, a call to celebrate the fact that we are a living part of the amazing fabric of life. Or in other words, to save life on one hand and to savor it on the other. Well, we've got both. I know, it's awful. And the two are intrinsically linked. I'd say we're called to plan our days to do a bit of both. Save what we can and savor all we can. One day set aside as Earth Day will never be enough, but it's still better than nothing. In the time, the months, between diagnosed with a terminal cancer of his throat and his death, our former minister at All Souls Church in Manhattan, the Reverend Dr. Forrest Church, came up with a short, pithy, 3-point statement of guidance on how to live meaningful lives. Want what you have is the first. The second is do what you can. And the third, be who you are. Now, those may be most useful for those who are socially situated near the top of the economic scale, but for me at least, they still resonate. Each could easily be a sermon topic of their own, or a book, or a life quest. Together they hearken back to the adage, live simply so that others may simply live. Yet our society isn't geared for living simply. But we don't need to be limited by that. In the Earth Fair we will enjoy together this afternoon, I've been told there will be, I hope I've got this right, sun-roasted hot dogs? The mind boggles, but I love it. That's something I'm looking forward to learning about and sampling too. Knowing what's most important, keeping our priorities clear, being aware of our impact on the world we love. Well, all that helps choose how we live our days as wisely as possible. Living simply, with awareness of our impact on both our planet and the others who share this world with us, helps us enjoy what we've never thought to ask for, the amazingly vibrant, fragile, miraculous planet Earth. So may it be. Amen.